Hello everyone, I'm Shahzeb Usman and welcome you to our conversation. Today we will be discussing Gaza, Zionism, Anxieties, and law. We are very happy to have Dr. Jordana Silverstein, who is a senior research fellow in the Peter MacMillan Center on Statelessness. Previously, she was a postdoctoral research associate in history at the University of Melbourne, Australia. She's the author of Cruel Care, A History of Children at Our Borders, and Anxious Histories narrating the Holocaust in Jewish communities at the beginning of the 21st century, and also a co-editor of Refugee Journeys, History of Resettlement, Representation, and Resistance. Hello, Dr. Jordana, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Hope it's not, I think it's the timings are very different in Australia. So I think it's probably cold in Australia right now.
It is, yes. It's winter, it's cold, but I've got the heater on, so it's not too
Wow,
bad.
that's unimaginable because right now it's scorching heat in Islamabad. So
Yeah,
it's very interesting to note that. But
yeah.
I'll start my first question, and basically it's not a question; it's something I will be narrating from your book. And I read it. I did not read it properly, but I went through it, and there were some lines that struck me, and I wanted to just read it for our audience. Um,
Mm.
so you say in your book, Anxious Histories, narrating the Holocaust in Jewish communities at the beginning of the 21st century, you start this with Theodore Adorno's quotation, and you say the premier demand upon all education is that Auschwitz does not happen again. Its priority before any other requirement is such that I believe I need not and should not justify it. Why did you choose to start your book with this particular quotation? I think it's something that is really striking, and I think it forms maybe the gist of your book. But why did you start with this particular quotation?
Yeah, it really struck me when I read it. So the book is based on my PhD dissertation. And so for my PhD, I looked at Holocaust education in Jewish schools in Melbourne and New York, and looked at the kinds of stories about the Holocaust that are being taught and the kinds of narratives, and looked at how they use survivor testimony and how the certainly colonialism influences the narratives, how the narratives are Zionist and yeah, how they're gendered and all those kinds of things, and how they fit into sort of Australia and the US. So I was thinking about what is Holocaust education? What are these teachers doing in these schools when they're teaching about the Holocaust? What are they, and particularly when they're teaching it to Jewish students? And one of my interviewees, so to do the research, I interviewed teachers of the Holocaust in these schools, and one of my interviewees talked at one point about, we're thinking about like, what is the work of Holocaust education? And that's really what I was trying to think about. What is the work that it is doing?
Yeah.
So this quote from Adorno that, the premier demand is that Auschwitz not happen again,
Hmm.
seems to me exactly what the point of learning about the Holocaust
Yeah.
is that, well, one of the points, right? We want to honor and learn about what happened, to honor those what happened,
Yeah.
and the millions of people who, Jewish and non-Jewish, of course there were non-Jewish victims of the Holocaust, honor those who were murdered or who were persecuted as part of it, and displaced. But we also want to ensure that it doesn't happen again. Of
Yeah.
course, the reality is that these things do keep happening. Genocides do continue, and mass murder continues. So we need to think about, how does this education actually work? But to me, it is so core to what the point of learning about the Holocaust is, and what the point for me, for me as someone who was also at university taught about the Holocaust, what the point of teaching about it is. What do I want my students to know? I don't necessarily want them to come away knowing the exact dates and places and names.
Mm.
Although, of course, those things are important, but you want your students to come away thinking about themselves as people who participate in the world, and who have capacity to intervene in it and try to ensure that these kinds of things don't happen. So I think it's kind of a matter of Holocaust education, and also I think this quote encourages us to think more broadly about what is the point of education? What is the point of history telling? What is the point of storytelling?
Mm. Very interesting. And I personally think that, a lot of the times very bad things can happen because we somehow rationalize it with time. And then I think it's the power of maybe the academia even sometimes, that they find narratives, they find somehow the vocabulary to justify even very horrible things. So they desensitize it. And I think this
Yes.
quotation somehow I can see that happening all the time in Pakistan, for example. Um, you know, Pakistan has probably one of the highest number of children out of school. There's a lot of children dying out of poverty. And I know a lot of people would not want it, but we are so desensitized to seeing children on the streets begging. And if we look into especially the child labor. Uh, even very decent families in Pakistan have, people under 10 working for them, and this has been desensitized. So, although it's an example, not related to particular this context, but a lot of horrible things have been happening in the world and in my country, probably in your country too, which is just rationalized, desensitized. So, I think this
Mhm.
is particularly what I really like about this quotation, something that I can understand from our context too. Uh,
Yeah.
my second point maybe is about more nation, and I think uh, this idea of nationalism has
Mm.
probably been solidified in the 20th century, right? It has been around for a long while, but I think in the current state, after decolonization, this particular nation state concept, I feel, has become very strengthened. Um, How do you think that this concept of nation results in perpetuating genocide or policies as we observed during the Holocaust? Because we have seen that, very prominent academic Benedict Anderson termed nation even as, imagined communities, and that the concept solidifying after the French capitalism. So, how do you think that this concept, this nation concept, uh, has been used or perpetuate genocide or policies as we observed in maybe Palestine right now from Israel? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think this long
Mm.
moment that we're in of
Yeah.
the world being organized by nation states, it's so important to think about it historically and to think about the fact that this wasn't always the case. And it won't be always the case in the future,
Yeah.
that this mode of organizing people um, is not eternal. It's not inevitable. It was created and it can change. Um, it's so deeply violent, right? These borders that nation states create are so incredibly violent. And for some of us, we fit in within them in some ways. We're born into citizenship and we remain citizens our whole lives. But for those of us that's the case, it's we're there's so many people that is not the case for. Um, that the point, the ways in which these nation states are created, they have these physical borders and they have these borders around who it contains. So we see, I'm speaking from Australia, and we see Australia as a settler colony that is founded on the genocide of Indigenous
Yeah.
people, that is founded on the genocidal exclusion
Yeah.
of Indigenous people, their murder, their removal, their forced assimilation. And of course, there's always resistance. It's not one way, but we see that this is what it is based on, and then we see it play out as well in immigration policies, in how Australia sort of governs who comes here and who is not allowed to come here. So it's the same, this is what we see, of course, in the Holocaust is Germany deciding that, the Nazis deciding that only certain people are German, and the rest have to be, denationalized and, of course, murdered and excluded. And then, of course, this spreads into a vision for Europe and really for the whole world, as that there's a need to make it absent of Jews and absent of Roma and Sinti, of disabled people, of communists, of homosexuals, of so many groups. So this kind of idea of purifying society, this idea that some people deserve not just to belong, but to exist, is really, you know, so central to how nation states, nations, and also empires, you know, are created as they spread around the world. So of course, yes, we're seeing the same as well at the moment in Palestine. We're seeing this, you know, what of course even the ICJ has called a plausible case of genocide, and
Yeah.
you know, that this overwhelming violence that we're watching on our screens of exclusion of people, exclusion of Palestinians from every aspect of society, and of course from life itself. And this is what, you know, when we have these nations and we have these, you know, this correlation between nation and state, we have this genocidal exclusion that's really quite horrific.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is something that I think about a lot, that a lot of cruelty in the world, maybe on a macro level, micro level, disrespect, starts from dehumanization of somebody. Uh, Humans make a criteria that this is, you have to be intellectually smart to be a human, you have to be beautiful to be a human, you have to be fit to be a human, and somebody, if in our own thinking, whatever criteria we have measured for ourselves, uh, if somebody doesn't meet that, we somehow stop thinking that they are, you know, they fit into the definition of being a human, and then any rights proceeding towards that. So I think that we see in the local context how the working classes suffer, and
Mm,
also on a macro level how ethnic displacement has been used um, under this particular dehumanization. So that I find really interesting. I think is the psychology of humans, maybe. And again, when you talk about nation, again, if you are talking about this is my tribe, and my tribe is human because it fits a particular criteria of a human, and others, as we do otherization of other people, of other nations, they are not fit to be a human. So they don't
yeah.
deserve anything. So I think that's very interesting how it has been used for so many centuries, this particular idea, and it's still used. Uh, I'll center my discussion now more on the Zionism because I think you have worked a lot on it. So I want
Mm.
to talk about it and how you have your thinking is about it. And again, I will quote another quotation that you have used in your book, because you have used very good quotations in your book. And you start each chapter with a quotation that I was noticing. That's something very interesting too. So I'll quote another of the quotations you have cited. Um, so you say that what can, for want of a better term, be called Zionist discourse, with its hybrid enlightenment, romantic, revolutionary, and colonialist legacy, as well as its attendant assumptions regarding Jewish history and the diaspora, has permeated every aspect of modern Jewish culture. So, quoting this particular quotation, my question is very simple. How do you think that the Zionist narrative or ideology has been used to perpetuate the events we are currently seeing in Gaza?
Yeah, so that quote is from Emil Alcalay,
Yeah,
who's
yeah,
a
yeah,
um,
yeah,
yes, a scholar
yeah.
who's talking particularly about yeah, I mean he so one of the things he's looking at, and one of the things I look at in my work as well, is the way that Zionism there's um the way that Zionism treats Jews.
Yeah.
There's I've got like, which isn't to prioritize it in any way above the way that it treats Palestinians. But I guess as a historian of Jewish history, one of the things that I also think about is how does it think about Jewishness, and how does it treat other Jews? And so, of course, you know, Zionism is a European project. It comes out of a particular European moment of European anti-Semitism, of an idea that a set of European Jews have about how Jews fit into the world and where Jews belong. There's this idea that they have that Jews don't fit into Europe, So they, in a sense, agree, and sometimes quite explicitly agree, with anti-Semitic ideas that say that Jews don't fit into Europe and that Jews need to leave. And Jews are understood not to fit into Europe because they're understood to be inferior, because, like, down to their bodies, that they're not, their bodies are not solid enough, their bodies are not strong enough. So we see the creation of an idea, a Zionist idea of the new Jew, who is strong, who commands an army, who controls land, and controls culture, is highly assimilated into European culture, into, that is, non-European, non-Jewish European culture. And of course, has a nation state and has, all the things that go with it. And that includes, of course, also a rejection of Jews remaining outside Israel. So remaining, other Jews who are in Europe are understood to be weak, incapable, feminine, and, as, in a sense, worthy of being destroyed. And similarly, Jews throughout the Middle East and North Africa are understood by Zionism to be inferior, and to not have a place there, North Africa. So Zionism really creates an understanding that Jew and Arab are separate things. And that's something that Amir Al-Khalid writes a lot about. And so this complete separation between Jew and Arab is, of course, something we see completely playing out in Palestine and in Gaza. This idea that, and, in the way that the discourses around, discussions around what is happening, what Israel is doing in Gaza, and in Palestine, and playing out throughout the West, is this idea that these are two groups who are fundamentally separate and always opposed to each other. So this is what, very much what we're seeing play out, and this idea that this difference needs to be destroyed, that Arabs are inferior, that they are also highly dangerous, and so need to be destroyed. So we see, this strength of the Israeli army, really comes from this idea that this is what is necessary for Jewish life to persist, is a strong army that behaves in a particular kind of way, a highly violent way. So we see, many others, sort of talk about Zionism as, and Israel as sort of a movement out of time. Like this movement, made complete sense in a particular moment of Western imperialism. It makes no sense. It's so out of place in this current moment, which is also devastating that there was ever once a time when this was in place. And of course, it never was in place, appropriate or in place from the perspective of those who have suffered the violence of imperialism. But yeah, this is really what we're seeing, is this hold that Zionism has on creating ideas of what a Jewish life looks like, what Jewish safety looks like, and thus, what that's, for Jews inside Israel, but also for Jews outside Israel, where Zionism says, our lives are not sufficient, and we all need to be signing up to the Zionist effort, and that's, our responsibility. And we really see that playing out very much at the moment. That is, Zionism has very much kind of permeated everything. At the same time, of course, there are many Jews who are not Zionist, myself included, many who are, on various spectrums of anti-Zionism, and who reject this as an expression of Jewishness, or as an expression of humanness, right? Not all of us in the world are signed up to imperialism. There are many of us who resist and who stand alongside Palestinians in resisting, and who, of course, like the primary victims and the primary way in which Zionism is focused, and the primary experts on what Zionism is, are, of course, Palestinians who experience it and who theorize it and know about it in much more sophisticated ways than we do.
Very interesting. And I think What I find really interesting all about all of this is that how Zionism has been used to show that it is part or representative of the Jewish religion
Mhm.
or culture. And I think this has caused a lot of, as I would say, misrepresentation outside Europe. And I think Zionism has become a face of Jewish religion
Mm.
and culture, which is, I think, really sad. And although uh, even the Zionists are, not very much fond of, let's say, who of Jews who are not Zionists, right? As you
No.
said. So, and in fact, they have been used, Zionists have used Zionism and even the misrepresentation of the Jewish culture and religion to otherize other Jewish people who are not in party with that. So I think that's something very interesting you pointed out and flagged out. And
Yeah, it's not, I mean, yeah, it's really crucial to sort of highlight that Jews have always been opposed to Zionism. There've always been Jews who are
yeah,
that there are Jews who, yeah, before the Holocaust, Zionism was a marginal political movement. It obviously changed afterwards, but it's still, there have always been Jewish movements, Jewish communities, and Jewish individuals who are highly opposed to Zionism and don't see it as an expression
yeah,
um, their Jewishness, and also that there are significant numbers of non-Jewish Zionists in the
yeah,
world. The,
yeah,
the largest body of Zionists are actually Christian Zionists in the US.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's not, Zionism isn't, just a Jewish movement.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what I find really interesting about all of this is that how it has been used to clinically divide people, as you were saying that this is Arab, this is Zionist, this is this. And then when you have done that, you can easily then pit people against each other and do very horrible things. I think we have seen it a lot in a lot of different places in the world. It was part of the colonial project, even in the country that I am in Pakistan, generally in India as well. When the British came in this place, they also did that on a very different basis. And they created this concept of martial race and all of that. So that was probably that colonial system is still in use. And I think that tells us how everything somehow comes back to colonialism in some way, including this Gaza crisis. Uh, and I think that's a perfect way to basically ask my next question that do you find any parallels of what is happening in Gaza or the elements of the same ideology being signaled or played with in other parts of the world? Like, do you find some
Yeah,
parallels? Yeah.
absolutely. I think it's really important to see this as another example of genocide, of settler colonialism, um, and we see settler colonialism in so many countries around the world. Of course, where I am in Australia, the US,
Mm.
Canada, New Zealand, and so on. And it's really important to see these parallels between what is going on in these various countries. That um, the yeah, and to see as well, of course, the parallels between apartheid in South Africa and apartheid in occupied Palestine, to see the ways that genocide is done in similar ways around the world and across time. So I think, we have a sense now of what is going on. We'll know the full extent of the different forms of violence that are happening at the moment at some point in the future. Once more testimonies come out, we know that we're not getting the full picture of what's going on. What we are seeing, though, is so horrific. And we see these countries working together and supporting each other, most particularly, of course, the US. It's supporting, and that's because they have these shared settler colonial histories. They work together because they have, the same kinds of histories to draw on, and this has the same kinds of politics of dispossession of Indigenous peoples that they're pursuing, that they're still pursuing into the present. Right, these are all still settler colonies,
Yeah.
which means that these politics and these practices continue into the present. So we see as well, of course, forms of resistance sort of talking to each other. We see Indigenous peoples working together across borders, learning from each other, building on each other's work, and supporting each other. So I think that, there's these really important ways in which, these things do historically resonate.
Mm. Very interesting. And I think, uh, like we have seen a lot of examples. I think I come from South Asia. I'm from Pakistan. And a lot of people in my country believe that what is happening in Kashmir, in India, uh, especially after the abrogation of Article 317 Indian Constitution and taking away Kashmir's special status. A lot of people, there is a lot of literature that claims, and I'm not saying as a Pakistani, as like somebody who is unbiased on this matter, that it has been used to dispossess Kashmiris and then change the demography of Kashmir, as Israel has done. So there were a lot of academic literature that India is then using the same blueprint of what Israel was using in Palestine to get away with that kind of dispossession. Same blueprint. So I think that, and we have seen in other parts of the world too. I think, uh, we see internally as well in different countries what's happening, as we are saying, what the class violence in these countries. So I do think that maybe the Zionists have gone probably in a very, very manifest manner, I would say, or a very brutal manner, that even the people who are very much aligned with them can say that, okay, this is going too far. But I think the elements of the thinking of it is present everywhere in the world, especially, I think, in broken democracies or in post-colonial countries like Pakistan, India. So I think that the seed is there and it just reaches the right conditions to grow in most of
Mm,
these countries. Um,
yes.
and I think, how do you link with this liberal capitalism, which is very much related to colonialism, this idea of liberalism, liberal democracy, liberal market? Um,
Mm,
I see so many economists and lawyers. Myself, I studied law for like 6 years. Most of my friends are working in, very corporate law firms. And when I talk to these economists and lawyers who are primarily trained in liberal thought, they're so rigid about their, like, the thing that whatever they have studied as a law or economics is just like the science. Although it's just one theory that they have studied, that is liberalism. They haven't studied another theory of law, which might say very different things about, for example, right to property, or same with economics. So, how do you think that the liberal
mm.
capitalism is linked with genocidal actions in history, and currently in Gaza, especially considering the connection of it with Zionism? Do you find I think I've invoked a lot of different themes: Zionism, liberal capitalism, and post-colonial work. So, do you find connection with these three?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is so important. Of course, in settler colonialism,
Mm.
the land is the object of possession. And I think we see that, so clearly, as of course, capitalism is also about acquisition of land.
Yeah, yeah,
um, this is what we're seeing in Gaza, right? Like the
yeah,
what is going on is this drive to push Palestinians out,
yeah,
to take the they're already, selling Gazan land around
yeah,
in the
yeah,
US, and like it's so quick, this accumulation of property, this incredible destruction. And of course, we know that, the US setting up that pier was not ever about helping Palestinians, helping
yeah,
Gazans, but
yeah,
is about all these kinds of ways of getting US, making it US soil as well, and getting the US, so closely involved in what is happening on the ground and what can be accumulated. So I think this is really crucial. And I think, the other part of it, of course, is the use of Palestinian labor. And Israel has, long relied on Palestinian labor, which they can not pay much for, obviously, and can completely exploit. Um, and what's happening now is that is, so there are a lot of Gazans who were in what's called the 48 territories, or inside occupied Palestine, went, in October, at the start of October, when the attacks happened and when the genocide started. There were many and who were obviously caught up and were either have been moved to the West Bank or returned or have been imprisoned. So people are being moved around, and all kinds of Palestinian labor has been shut off and been used. So it's this kind of ability that Israel has to control Palestinians and how they work as well, to exploit them in various ways. And now, to imprison them and exploit them in other even more horrific ways. So I think this is all, in terms of thinking about how these processes of accumulation of people, of land, of the resources is so crucial to understanding what's going on at the moment.
Mm. And I often think that, at the end of the day, it's all about resources, right? We imagine, I sometimes think, if Palestinians stop resisting and they just give up their land to Israelis, what will happen? You know, either they can leave if if some nation hosts them, probably that is not going to happen also. Like second, they are then dependent on Israelis totally, and because they don't have any land, so they will be exploited as cheap labor for them, and live in poverty and just be a dependent ethnic group. And I think that's something really interesting, because at the end of the day, if we assume that they just have surrendered to them, this is what will happen, I think, to Palestinians. And I think I find it very interesting how this is so much related to, in many countries such as Pakistan itself and other, India even also, I would say a lot of South Asian countries, where a lot of the squatter settlements, or these irregular settlements, are bulldozed because they are on a land which is state land or whatever, and the dispossession occurs. All of the constitutions of both of our countries say the right to housing is a fundamental right. So I think that this is something which is very interesting, because I would say that at the end of the day, it's all about resources. Uh,
Yeah.
Maybe on a ethnic level or a class level, it goes sideways, in my opinion. Uh,
Mm.
w- my last question is about, um, the significance of academia, the significance of lawyers, the significance of international law, this concept of legalese, using these legal language, clinical legal language, to whitewash, to justify, to rationalize a lot of these crimes. So, how do you view the significance of all of these things in perpetuating the anxieties and narratives you mention in your book, and the dehumanizing narrative you also mention in your book, in relation to Zionism? How do you feel the connection of it?
Yeah, this is important. I mean, I think we're seeing at the moment as well, all these discussions about international law and its role in this moment. We see as well, that the of course, international law. In my research, the teachers, the way they narrate the Holocaust and its end is through the Holocaust. One of the things that brings the Holocaust to an end is, besides, there's the creation of the state of Israel, but it's also the creation of the Nuremberg trials, and sort of a reinstitution of
Yeah.
or creation of so much of international law. So there's real faith held in that. We're seeing at
Mm,
the moment, it's both that it can be used, but also how toothless it is. And
mm,
it doesn't, ICJ can keep ruling, and this is doing nothing at all to stop what's going on. And then in 10 years' time, when it is officially ruled a genocide, what is the purpose of that? And I think, in this moment as well, we see these real divides opening up in academia, of people who are engaging with what's going on, talking about it, people who are and are really centering it in their work. And we're seeing a lot of that in people academics who are using um, their their roles and their knowledge in order to try to speak to all kinds of publics and all kinds of academic spaces, to students and other in research. And of course, we're seeing many academics who are not doing that as well, and who are, sort of, not stepping into that space. So we see, I guess, in a way it comes back to sort of liberalism and ideas of what is the university for, what is discourse for, what does civil discourse look like, what is the role of the academic, of, the historian or the lawyer, or any other kind of academic in this moment. When we see, certainly here in Australia, you see journalists, some, expressing solidarity or expressing concern for their colleagues in Gaza who are being assassinated, others who are not doing so. And these sorts of conversations happening as well in journalism schools, or, amongst medical schools, all these kinds of things. So I think that there are these very live and really important discussions about what is the point of academia, what is the point of what we're talking about, what is the point of academic discourse and research and teaching, to go back to where we started, like what are we doing this for, and what are we hoping to achieve by this? And I think these are really unresolved and potentially unresolvable, but really important discussions to be having amongst lawyers and historians and academics and everybody.
Hmm. Very interesting. I think, to be very honest, I feel that this crisis has exposed a lot of the hypocrisy of the academia, to be very honest. Especially what we are seeing in the Western academia, in America, how the freedom of expression, which was the holy grail of Western academia against, communism and any anti-West movement, that was like, oh, you guys don't have freedom of expression and all of that, and we have freedom of expression. How it has been, how it has been become naked, to be very honest. Like, we have seen very biased reporting by media outlets, big media outlets. We have seen professors. I recently read that a law professor literally wrote a letter to employers that, don't hire my students because they are being pro-Palestine.
Yeah.
So things like that happening, I think it is something which is very sad. And I
Yes,
think
absolutely.
it shows that uh, uh, different rules apply for different things. There is no justice in the world. There are no good guys in the world. All of these organizations, NGOs, INGOs, they are, um, in Pakistan, we have this whole development sector, and these people talk very nice things, and these people talk eradicating poverty in five-star hotels and these conferences, and they get a lot of money through these
Yeah.
Western funders, mostly from the Western governments, who are very much supporting genocide in Palestine. But they're talking about human rights, but they're still getting money from these sectors. And so I think it has exposed media organizations. It has exposed these liberal NGOs that work in global South countries. It has exposed, I think, even the United Nations framework. ICJ might have been, as a lawyer, I would say that, it has done somewhat a positive role eventually. But as you said, what is the efficacy of it? Like, okay, we will have a 10 years down the line, a judgment which states, okay, it was a genocide. So what? Like, it is at the end of the day a jurisprudential debate for lawyers. There
Yeah.
are lawyers might become famous for it. Okay, you went to ICJ and used a lot of sophistry, used a lot of nice words in a very nice accent, and you presented the case. But it doesn't really. Maybe sometimes I feel that it takes the light away from those freedom fighting people, people who
Yes.
actually goes into political resistance. So the
Yeah.
academics, I find lawyers, journalists sometimes become famous at the expense of that tragedy. I'm not doubting their intentions. I'm sure they are doing it with pure heart, but I feel it sometimes shifts the narrative
Mm,
to something that is not that important. The important
yeah.
is the suffering. Important is that political resistance, on ground resistance that has to be showed in its true colors, which I think is the most important thing. So I think I personally, I'm talking about in a very personal way that this is somewhat has, the last shred of my faith in liberal system has now, this crisis has, I think, exposed that, and I
Yeah.
also find a psychosis in people around me. Like I find my friends working for these very big multinational corporations who are very clear on their position on this. The organization have been firing, as you might have noticed, they've been firing employees if they are being pro-Palestine. And we have seen that in America. So
Yes.
a lot of the friends that I have who are working with these organizations, although they are very much in support of Palestine, but they can't say anything. So I think
Mm,
the power of economic financial world, how they control the resources, has also been used to govern behaviors of
yeah.
people, even if their thinking is not aligned with the behavior. So I think it has exposed everything, in my opinion, about the system in a very naked way, and I think that was
Abs-
important. And that was
yeah.
important because I think the first layer of resistance is to expose the tyranny, and then you fight it. So I think that all that sacrifice hasn't gone in vain. It had some purpose, maybe.
Yeah.
But it was really good to talk to you, Dr. Jardana. It was lovely to have you. I think the conversation we have, I think, was not maybe more a lot about international law, but it was a lot about how politics shape the law.
Mm,
So
mm,
I think that is far more important in the critical legal studies rather than just if I have told, okay, that this is the legalese. I'm not giving a lecture or
yeah.
anything, but I think that was far important that how politics shape the law. So I'm
Mm.
thankful to you for joining us and giving us time from your very busy schedule. It was a lovely conversation for us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. So, yeah, these things are really important to talk about. So thank you so much for having